So when you think about contact center performance, I'm going to show you what you probably all have out of your VoIP systems, like your Ring Centrals, your GoToConnects, your dial pads. All of that data is in silos, right? When the contact center is looking at the contact center, they're just looking at how many calls did we take? How many calls did we answer or miss, right? They never tie that data to actual appointments booked. They're never looking at, well, where did the calls come from? And can we make tweaks or adjustments to the types of calls we even allow into the team because we're overloaded or because the calls we're getting never book? And so that's really important fundamental information to look at. And once you can start to look at data outside of the typical data sets, you can again start making decisions. So this is examples of the typical information practices have to them. What's my average call wait time? How many calls did I miss? This is not good data, right? This is typical data that practices have today. But the way that you want to look or should be using this data is, well, where are these calls coming in from? So it's fine that I'm missing calls, right? Because no one's going to answer 100% of their calls, and it might not make financial sense to be over capacity on Mondays and Tuesdays when you're very busy and be significantly under capacity on Thursdays and Friday, right? Everyone has these lopsided operational schedules because of the way that patients interact with the practice. But when you really start to tie this data together, what you want to be able to understand is, well, what drives these calls in? And are there any things that's driving calls in that are just not good, that we just can't convert or just aren't of qualified patients? This is some additional data, right? The typical data that a call center looks at. And they're always focused on shorter call times, right? Less abandoned calls. They're always looking at how much time is our agent on the phone. Again, I would caution you to think of this a little bit differently, because these data points they're important, but they just don't matter for the greater good. The amount of time on the phone isn't the benchmark to be looking at. It's how many actual calls were actual leads, and of those, did they actually book? And so what that looks like from a future perspective is being able to make marketing decisions based off real-time information. So that's great. We can see all of that data, but of that data, what we want to understand is how many appointment types did we drive appointments in from? And of course, we want to know who's handling these calls or web leads, but we want to understand, are there marketing impacts on my operations, right? Are we running campaigns on specific days when we just don't need that additional support because we don't have the team to handle it? That also gives you the ability to make real-time decisions inside the contact center. So how can we leverage IVR and lead routing scripts to get the highest performance on our calls? How do we deliver real-time updates to the marketing team about what's going on in our contact center to scale down marketing initiatives if we are at capacity? And how do we train and coach our team on managing this information and producing like-kind data that supports all of our departments? We want to get into that real-time feedback loop, right? We want to understand what's happening from marketing that's driving calls in. And all marketing, don't just think, SEO, don't just think paid search. Referral marketing is marketing. Existing patient marketing is marketing, right? So you want to make sure that you're evaluating the entire business as you put this data through. And the outcome of this becomes tools that tie all of this information together, where you can start to look at every individual team member, not just by how many calls they took and how much time they spent on the phone, but how many actual patient inquiries did they take that were leads for the practice? How many web leads are they handling, right? A lot of people are handling inbound web leads that just don't show up in the call data. And so it's really important to get a full picture. How many team members are handling text or emails to these patients? That's also time generally not seen. And this data has the tie to the booking data, because Ryan could handle 100 calls and be on the phone for 100 minutes and book 0 appointments. Whereas Johnny could handle 100 calls, 50 of those become appointments, and 35 of those come in and see providers. So now we start to look at that a little differently, right? And we start to say, now that we're looking at this differently, who's really the more valuable team member? Or what is it about Johnny's calls that we don't really need in the call center department focused on scheduling appointments, because they're not actually leads for the practice. They're not actually of value for the practice. So how can we start to move this around to make sure that our team is performing up to our expectations, but giving them the types of calls or the types of inquiries that we need to give them in order to perform? That then blends into what's happening off all of these calls. So it's great we're getting calls, but what are we booking? If marketing's job is to drive up as many new patients as possible, but we're not seeing that trend take place, and we're spending a ton of money on marketing and advertising, we're driving in a ton of calls, but that is not resulting in more new patients, then that's a problem. And the best way to see that is by tying those marketing initiatives to the call center, to the actual appointments being booked. Lastly, tying that clinical data to the call center. So again, you have all of these calls coming into your business, but what's the throughput? Where are we putting these patients? What providers are they scheduling with? What types of availability do our providers have, so that we can start to play chess with our schedules and make sure that that contact center team is playing that game of chess, right? If we have a new patient in, sometimes you see contact centers just start to freely book with team members or other providers that they're comfortable with, when they might not be the best provider to book with. So we've all seen the EMRs produce these find first available tabs. That doesn't mean that that's the best person to put that appointment on. And so by customizing some of the data that's available to your contact center leads, they can now help coach those team members on exactly where we want to be putting appointments, at what time and when, to make sure we have the best schedule across the organization. Furthermore, looking at future appointment tracking. So we all have this data. We know who's booked up and when into the future based off all of the appointments. And so if you're not using that data in your contact centers to make sure that every day we're adjusting who the individuals are scheduling these appointments with, then you're likely falling short on your goals to be as efficient and effective as possible in your contact center. And again, this impacts marketing, right? Because it's not just about making sure your contact center is making your clinicians effective, but we also want to make marketing effective, right? If we're driving leads in, but just booking them 3 months out, then that becomes a problem.